All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Home Services Summit webinar series. As you all know, if you've attended here before, all the content, all the conversation is about home service brands and home service franchising. And I couldn't be more excited to have Dan here on to talk more about franchise sales. And so before we dive into Dan's background and all the questions I've got for Dan about how you can sell more franchises and understand the psychology of candidates looking to buy a franchise, some quick background on me. I'm one of the founders of 5 Star Painting, the CEO of 5 Star Franchising today. We own 6 home service brands and Pronexus. And our mission at Pronexus is to transform the customer experience in the home services industry through voice, chat, text, and instant booking. So the format is pretty straightforward. I will just engage in a wonderful conversation with Dan and ask a bunch of questions around his experience in home service franchising and franchise sales. At the 45-minute mark, we're going to open this up to all of our live listeners and viewers. You'll note on the top right, there's a chat section. Feel free to jump in that chat at any point in time. You can load any questions you have for Dan or I, and I'll make sure we get to those at the very end. We'll take those 15 minutes to do that. And then we'll close, and I'll see you next month, same time, same place, same channel. So Dan's bio and background, he started his career at Neighborly, or back then it was called Dwyer Group, in 2007, and was recruited to oversee franchise development for Dreammaker Bath and Kitchen. He spent the next 15 years onboarding new concepts at the Dwyer Group as they became Neighborly brands and grew to a $3.5 billion company. I think we said just earlier, Dan, that you're almost at $4 billion now at Neighborly, which is incredible. I know that when we sold 5 Star Painting to Neighborly in 2014-15, they had just crossed the 1 billion mark. So it just goes to show how amazing home services is and how we're fulfilling some serious needs in the consumer markets. So Dan onboarded Cincinnati-based concept Window Genie in 2016 when Neighborly acquired the brand and led the team to record-breaking growth for 4 years before taking over Neighborly's 2 real estate brands as VP of Franchise Development for Real Property Management and Housemasters Home Inspection. Now, earlier this year, Dan started his own company called Franchise Growth Co., which is a full-service franchise development company offering brokerage services, FSO services, and lead gen services for franchisors. So that's the backstory. And I know we spoke backstage, Dan, about some of your experience around, your career and how you've been involved in franchise development and really been involved in placing, I think we said 300 individuals into the home services industry through some of the Neighborly brands, which is, incredible over your career. Let's just talk about what got you into Neighborly, why you chose to get into franchise development and some of your experience there.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. Well, I like most people, I would say, didn't really choose franchising as much as franchising sort of chose me. I think that's a lot of people who are in the franchising world would echo that sentiment. But it was just a series of events back in 2007 when Doug Dwyer, who's the son of Don Dwyer, the founder of Dwyer Group down Neighborly, was looking for another development professional for Dreammaker Bath and Kitchen. I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time. Neighborly and Dreammaker are based here in Waco, where I live today, so knew nothing about Waco. And remember, this is back before Fixer Upper and Chip and Joanna Gaines and all that. So Waco back in 07, 08 was very different than it is today. Not quite as nice and pristine. So it was a bit of a shift going from the frozen north of Minnesota down to little Waco, Texas. But really fell in love with the concept of Dreammaker Bath and Kitchen, fell in love with the concept of franchising and what that can do for entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs that are looking to get into business ownership, and the rest is history. And it's been an incredible journey ever since.
So I didn't realize, did you say you're from Minnesota?
Correct.
How come you didn't say Minnesota? You didn't say Minnesota properly. You've been in Waco, Texas.
I know, right? Yeah. Now I say y'all, and I, picked up my wife's southern drawl, so it's rubbed off on me after the last 15 years.
We can get you back up here and get back to your roots. I'm just north of. I come from Winnipeg, was where I was born and raised, and so the land of 1,000 lakes is quite common to me, and it's a great place to visit. Incredible summers there. So.
That's right.
Obviously, you made this decision to now, after 15 years at Neighborly, to start your own business to help other home service brands sell and attract the top candidates to their concept. I'd like you to just kind of speak to, why do you think franchising needs another FSO?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if franchising necessarily needs just another FSO, to be totally frank with you. I do think franchising needs an FSO and FSOs that think differently and do things differently. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of FSOs out there that have garnered a reputation for just being a hired gun, go sell as many units as humanly possible, sell for 3, 4, 5 years, hundreds and hundreds of units. A lot of those are multi-packs, and you got one owner buying 2, 3, 4, up to 10 units at a time. But what we see and what we've seen kind of what ends up happening at the end of all that is you look back 3 or 4 or 5 years later, an FSO sold, 200 or 300 units. A third of those are open. 40% of those are actually open. And so you end up having a operations team who's struggling to keep up with the amount of units that are sold. You got franchisees who are frustrated because they sign an agreement, they can't open their doors. And so what we're trying to do is really approach the industry differently and focus on truly partnering with franchisors that are looking to grow their footprint, want to handle franchise development, but want to grow at a pace that's sustainable and bring on the right people, make sure they're buying the right number of territories instead of just how many units can we sell. A lot of FSOs there don't care who they bring you, they care how many people they bring you. And that's a big mindset shift that we look at differently.
Well, and when we were talking backstage, you mentioned, of the 300 locations, individuals, I want to make sure we're clear on that. The 300 individuals you sold, the vast majority of those sales were for single territories. And Neighborly has had that strategy of really focusing more on a single territory versus a multi-territory. Maybe just talk to me about that. Why do you think it's important to and I'm assuming that's one of the things how you're saying you're different. I'm assuming that means that you at Franchise Growth Co. aren't emphasizing multi-pack deals. You're actually going after the individual for single territories. Why do you think that's important?
Yeah, and let me be clear. I'm not saying that we don't sell multi-territories or that's not part of the strategy at all, because it certainly is for the right brands and for the right buyer, I think is the most important thing. You're spot on, though. Neighborly's mentality in the 15 years I spent there, the vast majority of their brands sold single unit territories. There was a couple brands that, brought on multi-packs, 2-packs and 3-packs, but that was rare. The vast majority of their brands did single units. The brands we're working with, some do single units, some do multi-territories. I think you have to understand what your territory model looks like. And more importantly, instead of just approaching every candidate going, hey, my goal is to sell this person 2 or 3 or 5 territories, really understanding what is this person's financial capabilities and wherewithal, what is their leadership ability to build and scale a team? Do they have the ability to lead a team? Do they have leadership skills? Can they build a phenomenal culture inside their team? And if it makes sense, then absolutely, we're happy to sell someone multiple territories. But I think the difference is we don't approach every sale with, hey, our goal is to sell this person 2 or 3 or 5. Our approach with every person we talk to is, hey, let's understand who this person is, what their long-term strategy is, what their goals are, and what their personal and financial capabilities are, and then decide with the operations team, does it make sense for this person to start with one? And Scott, most franchisors, if you get a successful franchisee who comes in it and they're just crushing it and they're killing it, you and I would both love to give that person an opportunity to buy another territory, open another location. But there's something about giving someone a period of time to prove themselves and show us that they can actually execute before allowing them to expand.
I want to kind of maybe just speak right to, I think one of the reasons why I believe multi-unit sales has become more popular, right? For most franchisors and home services, we leverage and rely heavily on franchise broker networks to help us find candidates. And if you're a franchise broker and you've got a candidate that has the wherewithal to buy a 3-pack, and that means there's usually a full franchise commission on the first deal. Second one's a little slightly discounted on the third, right? I mean, they can look at making $70,000 off of a multi-pack deal versus 30,000 or 35,000 on a single, right? And I think a lot of franchise brokers or franchise people in the industry would prefer to see deals at multi-pack levels, and they're going to want to show brands that'll offer that. At least I'm just presuming that's the case. And Dan, please help me if I'm wrong, if I'm off base. How do you deal with that? Because we want to move units. We need to attract these top talent franchisees, and you want to sell units, and you're competing with people who are selling 2 and 3 and 4 packs. Did
I lose you, Scott?
Are we live still? I think so. I don't know what
Yep,
happened, but I'm
gotcha.
back. And then you got the question, Dan. How do you manage that?
Yep, I'm tracking with you. So how do you compete with the brands that are pushing multi-packs? And yep, totally understand. And yeah, so again, for the certain type of candidate, I think that strategy makes a lot of sense. I guess my only question and pushback on that is that sustainable, right? And maybe there are some brokers out there that don't really care about that, but I think there are enough consultants, when they start working with a candidate, they're not just trying to make a sale. That's certainly a part of it, and they're looking to earn a commission. And I think offering a very healthy commission to consultants is going to attract the best leads. But at the end of the day, most consultants are also wanting to make sure that this person who they're working with, that they're showing brands that they're setting them up to succeed, and they're not sitting out into something that is completely unsustainable. They're buying off way more than they can chew. They're getting too much territory that they're never going to develop just for a commission. If commission's the only thing you're looking for, then I would say you're probably in the wrong game as a franchise consultant. That's certainly important, and we believe in paying franchise consultants very handsomely for the work that they do, because they do put a lot of work in vetting candidates and bringing them to the table. But at the end of the day, if you're going to build a sustainable brand and not just sell deals, it's about matching the right person with the right capabilities, with the right territory size. And sometimes that's selling them multiple territories up front, sometimes it's not. And frankly, I think I know the mentality of a lot of franchise consultants is they're looking to show brands that not only pay well, but brands they believe in, that have a solid culture. They want to partner with franchisors who are going to treat their franchisees right, who have long-term validation, right? Because you can sell a bunch of units, but if you have very few of those that actually open, what that ends up doing to your validation pool is you get a bunch of franchisees that are ticked off. They're in 2-3 years. They've only opened one of their 4 units, and they're unhappy, or the franchisor's unhappy, and all of a sudden your validation just falls off the map. And so again, that goes back to my question: is that really sustainable? So sure, you can do that for a while, but if you're gonna build, you're gonna do development for years and years and years, you've got to match the right people with the right size territories. And I think there's enough good, solid franchise consultants out there who view that the exact same way. Bill Scott?
I'm back, and I may bounce again.
Back.
It's the Canada's a third world country right now with its internet. We haven't got Elon Musk is selling these days just isn't working like it should. But I do appreciate your answer there. I mean, we had Mark on from IFPG on one of our shows recently, and he brought that up actually, that at the end of the day, he makes his living off of making a commission off of each of the franchise sales and the deals he does. But these are people he knows, these are relationships he's got, and that's far more important to him in the long run. And he gets most of his deals from referrals. That's how he actually gets a lot of his candidates. So I think, you want to be the long ball in this game for sure.
Right.
But I think that is one of the realities we have to face, right? That as a team looking to sell, we are competing against other concepts, and we have to make sure that we get our franchise consultants' attention as well. So Dan, maybe talk to me a little bit about kind of your experience with, over the years, what percentage of your deals came from brokers versus referrals and portals and other lead gen methods? Kind of talk to us a little bit about that. What's the kind of the right mix in your view of where leads should be coming from and deals coming from?
Yeah, so we did it all, and over my career, depending on the brand, we did a various different lead sources. So I spent 8.5 years with Neighborly's flood and fire insurance restoration business, Rainbow International Restoration, and that business was, in the 8.5 years I was with that brand, we did almost no broker deals. Now this was back in 09, 10, up through about 2016. And we were selling close to 100 of those a year at the peak, with almost no brokers involved. So it was a lot of outbound lead generation. Those were during the years where the housing market was just in the toilets. There was a lot of home builders and remodeling contractors and guys like that were looking for work and had nothing to do because where the housing market was decimated. And insurance restoration was a fantastic opportunity that's consistent, never goes away. So we would pick literally, I remember back in 2009, 2010, printing a list from the Better Business Bureau in a market. I'd target a city like Cincinnati or Birmingham, and I would literally just call 3 home builders and remodeling contractors and literally cold call these guys and find out really quick if they're interested in having a conversation about diversifying into restoration. Or not, right? And those that were, you could dive deeper into what's going on, and those that weren't, you just move on. And then I spent time with like one of the most recent brands I led at Neighborly, Real Property Management. We were probably 70 to 80% brokers in that business, very heavily biz op, very heavily people coming out of the corporate world. So I lived in both worlds, and I think there's value in having a diversified lead generation. I think there are a lot of brands who rely too much on broker networks and don't have a well enough baked out internal lead source. But you really have to understand the types of buyers that you're looking to attract. I'll give you an example. So the 2 real estate companies I led right before I left Neighborly, Real Property Management and Housemaster Home Inspection. Real Property Management, the buyer there was much more sophisticated. It was a more sophisticated buyer. It was a C-level executive, a corporate refugee, so a little bit higher net worth, looking to get into a bit more professional white collar type business. So we realized after testing our marketing spend that spending paid ads on Google was far less effective than spending paid ads on LinkedIn, for example. That's where professionals live. Our ads were getting seen. We were getting clicks. We were getting much higher response rates spending our paid ad dollars there than we were on Google paid ads. Conversely, you look at Housemaster Home Inspection, that business, there's kind of 2 ways to build it. You can either be an owner-operator model, or you can build a team. But a lot of guys in that business start out, they're the one out in the truck and they got their flashlight and the ladder. They're doing a lot of the home inspections themselves. Those guys, the buyer for that type of brand doesn't live on LinkedIn. That type of person, they're not an executive who's living on LinkedIn. So our strategy there, we found after testing, we spent a lot more dollars on paid Google ads than we did on LinkedIn. So that goes back to my point. It really depends on the brand. And I think you have to sit down and do a very detailed persona on who's the type of person that we're looking to attract and what's the kind of person that our brand actually attracts to determine where you're spending your marketing dollars from an organic lead gen standpoint. And that is the starting point.
You know something that's super important. I don't know how often this is done in home service with home service brands, but it's this idea of understanding who the profiles, the use cases of a concept, right? And you just hit on something really important, right? Restoration, you were going after contractors who want to expand their business to include restoration work. And you're cold calling people all over the nation to try and find candidates. Almost nothing came from a broker network. That is impressive. I love the hustle. I love hearing the hustle. I love hearing that you're willing to get out there and call through. That's like my career back when I was 16 years old was hustling out of Yellow Pages, right? Finding my first few sales. That stuff's magical. But then also you laid out that for us that, if you know that your candidate's a corporate refugee, then you belong in LinkedIn. And if you know your candidate's someone that's maybe not in LinkedIn as much, you got to go into Google. I want to know, how did you arrive, or when did you arrive at that conclusion that you knew what the profile was of the people buying a franchise from you? Was that stuff that Neighborly handed to you because they did a bunch of research? They said, oh, if it's going to be Rainbow, this is what that candidate looks like. This is where you're going to find them. Or is that something you did yourself? How did you arrive at that conclusion?
Yeah, it's just being on the phone talking to candidates, right? I mean, and that's what I would say. Any good franchise organization, you've got to rely and get feedback on your frontline people, your development team that are on the phone talking to prospects. I love our marketing team at Neighborly. They did a phenomenal job for us, but I always viewed it when I was a vice president leading multiple brands there. I viewed it as my role to teach my marketing team who the ideal profile of my candidate was so that they could go find me more of that type of person, because I love marketing people, but a lot of times they're not the ones on the phone having these difficult conversations with candidates, understanding buying motives, helping people overcome their fears, helping their spouse overcome fears, helping them through how they're planning on funding the business, right? The people building your marketing websites and your ad campaigns, they're not living and breathing those conversations every single day like we are in franchise development. So it's our responsibility to take what we know just intuitively from doing it over and over and over again, and having those conversations and knowing what those pain points are, knowing what the buying motives are, teach that to our marketing team so they can go execute that. Because if not, sometimes they're going to do one size fits all, or sometimes they're going to be way off the mark because what they think is your profile of your buyer may or may not necessarily.
In these conversations that you are having, or your franchise sales team members are having with candidates, you're learning, I'm assuming, who are the people that are the buyers, what do they look like, who are successful in your concepts. Are you recording that data in like FranConnect, or are you somehow categorizing this in a way so 60% of all of our candidates are white collar refugees, 40% are blue collar? Are you doing that actively, or is it more anecdotal and you're coming back to your franchise, your marketing team and saying, look, we've talked to these people, we know who the best candidates are, and here's what they look like?
Yeah, you can certainly capture some of that data, but again, once you do it over and over again, you start to understand the profile, the types of person that we're looking for. So I'll give you another good example with Real Property Management. We started having success in 2020, 2021 with real estate professionals who were not doing property management, they were doing real estate sales. And we all know what's happened in real estate in the last 2.5 years. It's gotten hyper competitive. Prices have gone through the roof. The amount of realtors out there going after a limited amount of sellers and dollars is increased. So it's gotten highly competitive, and trying to help a buyer find a home without outbidding and weighted inspection and all those kind of crazy things has gotten harder and harder. So we started talking to very well established real estate brokerage firms who were looking to diversify their business into property management, because they're working with a lot of investors, and hey, we can also manage this property in addition to helping buy or sell it. So once we figured that out, we proved it out, right? We brought a couple of those guys on, and they were highly successful. And so we sat down with our operations team and said, that was the first conversation, is deciding, is this the kind of person we want? Are we having success with this type of candidate? And the answer was a resounding yes, absolutely. And so then we got with our marketing team and said, hey, here's a whole new category of person that we just kind of gotten through happenstance, more because they found us, we didn't find them. So how do we go find more lookalike people just like this? So that's where it starts, is once you have success with a type of candidate, you can then target it and say, okay, I've had a lot of success bringing this type of person on. How do I go find more?
So maybe let's just dive a little bit into, we mentioned this in our at the very beginning of this session, that we're going to be talking about, the psychology of the buyer, what's driving their decision to buy a business. And I've got some thoughts on that, and just from personal experience, but I've never actually done a survey to find out what really drove someone to buy a franchise. I'd love to just get, your feedback on this. Like, have you ever kind of measured or looked at or categorized, oh, this person's buying because they hate their job. This person's buying because they lost their job. This person's buying because they want to build equity. Like that there's some, driving force behind the why of buying a franchise. I'd love to hear from you. Like, what is the psychology of the people buying franchises in home services?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely all the above of what you just described, but it's different for every single person. And I think we in franchise sales, we tend to stay at the surface when we're asking questions to candidates. And it's very common in today's culture for people just to throw buzzwords, fat words out there. Hey, I want to control my own destiny. Hey, I want to have a better work-life balance. I want more control over my income. Yeah, so does everybody else, right? So do I. I mean, if I could snap my fingers and have all that personally, I would choose that as well, right? I mean, it's especially new franchise development people. I spent a lot of time training our new development people that came on board, and I would teach them how to get past those surface level answers to truly understand what for this specific person is driving them to want to be their own boss and run the business for themselves. And that's the other piece I think a lot of franchise development professionals miss is they focus so much on just presenting how sexy and awesome the brand is. And I led some fantastic brands that I believed in to my core. But regardless of how great the brand was and the opportunity and the financial unit economics and the culture, all that was fantastic. Frankly, at the end of the day, none of that really matters if I'm not talking to somebody who is not just interested in going into business for themselves, but they're actually committed to going into business for themselves. So I always told my team, hey guys, we're looking for the right person who's going into business for themselves for the right reasons. And they're doing this at the right stage in their life. If they're married, their spouse better be on board with the idea of business ownership, or else 6 months in, 12 months in, we're going to have a big mess on our hands. And so getting past the surface level reasons that people give for being interested in business ownership and truly understanding. I'll give you an example. This was back in probably 2017, 18. I was at one of our national conferences. I was working with our window team brand at the time. And I had this young man who came to meet the team day, brought his wife, brought their 2-year-old, child with them, still rolling around in the stroller. And at Meet the Team Day, we would always ask each person to stand up and share a little bit about themselves and why they're there. I'll never forget, this guy stood up in the front of the room and said, I'm working at AT&T right now. I don't have a college degree. I've just got a high school diploma. I'm never going to have more than, the 3 or 4% raise they give me every single year. And I want to go into business for myself to show every single other person who doesn't believe that I can be more than what I am now, that I can do more and that I can be more. And I was sitting in the back of the room and I remember looking at that guy going, that guy knows why he's going into business for himself. He is very clear on his why. He knows exactly why he wants business ownership. He knows exactly why he's not staying in the corporate world anymore. And that was a very specific and unique buying reason for that candidate specifically. So that's my point, is getting past the buzzwords, getting past the surface level stuff to truly drill down on what's driving this person because it's a big decision, right? I mean, you're changing your career, you're investing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. You and I both know most businesses take 6 to 12 months to get to cash flow positive. So you got to have difficult conversations with someone about, hey, what does it take to run your personal living expenses? What are your household bills? I'm not talking about going on vacation. I'm not talking about going out to eat. I'm talking about just, what does it take to pay your mortgage and food on the table and gas in the cars and pay your insurance bills? And is your spouse with? How much do they make? How much do they contribute to those fixed expenses? And how are you going to fund your personal living expenses for the first 6 to 12 months before the business starts to generate positive cash flow that you can start taking money out, right? I mean, those are the kind of conversations that get way past just the surface level, why somebody initially might say they're interested in business ownership. And then once you have that, then you can talk about how awesome and sexy and amazing your brand is. And you can talk about all the incredible things that your brand does. But I think too many franchise development professionals jump to that without establishing you
That's
really
fantastic.
understand
You hit on involving the spouse in the decision. Obviously, if the spouse isn't bought in, and the other spouse decided to just go ahead without their commitment, that's a recipe for disaster, clearly, right? And no one wants to be in that. But when do you invite the spouse of a candidate to be involved in the process? Do they come to meet the team day every time? Do you have them on the calls where you're talking about the concept? When do they get involved?
As early as possible. So if you can get them on the phone early, that's ideal. Sometimes that's not possible, but certainly by the time Meet the Team Day rolls around, and here's some common terminology I've given, and usually this is to guys, right? Because us as guys, sometimes we can get a little knuckleheaded and think that whatever I decide to do, my wife's going to be okay with that, and you and I both know, Scott, that's not always the case. Oftentimes it's not. So, having a conversation with someone saying, hey, listen, Jim, having Susie come to Team Day, it doesn't really benefit me. It doesn't benefit us. This is a benefit to you. And here's why it's important to have her come with you. Because number one, it's going to help her feel like she's being involved in that decision-making process. If you leave her out, she's going to feel like she's not being involved in whatever decision you're about to make. So including her, she doesn't necessarily, you may ultimately be the decision maker at the end, but I've been married long enough to know if my wife doesn't feel like she's involved in that decision-making process, there's going to be conflict. And number two, I know that there's things that my wife sees that I don't always see, and vice versa. She's got skill sets that I don't have, and I've got skill sets that she doesn't have. So I promise you, Jim, at Meet the Team Day, there's going to be things you pick up on that she may miss, and there may be things she picks up on that you don't miss. And so having a second set of eyes and ears there at Meet the Team Day really helps you be able to go back home, compare notes. And I know for my wife, she has kind of a sixth sense about people. She can sense if someone's genuine, where she can sense, hey, is this person, there's something off? Is this person not telling us the truth, right? Like, and you say that to somebody, and 9 times out of 10 they go, yep, you're spot on. My spouse is exactly the same way. You're exactly right. And so I think just having a real conversation with people and not making it about you. Now selfishly, obviously as franchisors, we know, spouse-and-tage is a real thing. And so if you don't get the spouse there, they have a high likelihood of making the deal when they get back home. So selfishly, yes, I want them there to get their buy-in. And I've literally seen where the night before at dinner, the spouse is there and she's sitting across the table with the arms folded and just, and by the end of Meet the Team Day the next day, she's given me a big hug and tears and, oh my goodness, this is exactly what Jim needs. And he's been looking at for this for years. I mean, you can see it in the body language when the night before the walls are up to when they come meet you and they see how genuine you are and how genuine the team is and how genuine the systems and the training and support and the process is. The walls come down. I
think it's important to remember, right, that so much of human decision making is emotional decisions. Like most of us make decisions on our gut. There are some people who are very analytical. It's all the numbers. They want a spreadsheet. They want to crunch it all down. They look at ROI, and that's all that matters. But so much of decision making, especially when you've got both people involved, the husband and the wife, or the partners involved, you've got two different people who are looking at things from a emotional viewpoint. They have to feel comfortable that to trust the brand and the people involved. And what we are doing in our sales process has got to check those boxes, or you're not going to get any further, right? So on that point, I'd love for you to spend some time talking about the sales process you guys use, and kind of take me from top of the funnel, leads come in from a broker or from a portal or from wherever. What's the sales process on that first call, second call, map review, meet the team, all those steps? Kind of walk me through that. And then I'd love for you to speak to what happens when you get ghosted, or there's that bulking that happens. People fall out of the process. Do you do anything to try and win them back in, or try to pull them back in to that process when you know that they're going through something in that stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the first thing I think a lot of people get a mistake on is treating leads from a broker differently than we treat leads from that haven't been qualified, right? Because we all assume we get leads from brokers, they're qualified. And I would say the vast majority of the time that's true, but we all know there are some very, very good brokers out there that do a phenomenal job of qualifying their candidates before introducing them to Zors. And there are a lot of brokers who are just throwing stuff against the wall to see what'll stick, and it's no different than another lead. So I always teach my teams, hey, that first initial call, we're going to go through that call exactly the same, whether it's somebody who clicked on an ad online or if it's from the best broker that we know we've done dozens of deals with. Doesn't matter. We're still going to get on the phone. We truly understand what that person's why is, what their buying motive is, qualify them financially. I don't care if I've got a full breakdown from the broker of their personal financial statement. I'm still going to verify where the capital is coming from and how they're planning on funding the business. Do you need to look at SBA? Do you need to look at a 401k Robs program? Mm-hmm. I'm still going to go through and ask the questions, and it may be a much quicker conversation if the broker has truly done the work up front. But regardless, it only comes from experience, right? Because I've gone through with candidates where I assumed, or one of my developers assumed, that the broker asked the question and didn't, and you get 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks down the road, only to find out this person doesn't really have the money that they thought they did, or whatever the case may be. And so you have that happen to you once, it'll teach you really quick to make sure you treat all leads the same, regardless of the lead source, and make sure you're asking the right questions for every single person. So I'm a big believer in slowing down up front so that you can speed up on the back end. What I mean by that is that initial call, what I teach my team is that should be, I know a lot of development professionals get on the phone and it's a 20, 25 minute, 30 minute call. Again, probably 70, 80% talking about how great the brand is. I'm a big believer in the exact opposite of that. That initial call should be more like 45 minutes, sometimes up to an hour, truly understanding who your candidate is, understanding their background, why they're even considering business ownership, how their spouse feels about the idea of business ownership, what their financial capabilities are, their current lifestyle and budget, like we talked about. I mean, we can eat up a good amount of 45 minutes to an hour on that call. There's an adage that I have learned that I believe in to my core, and that is that you gain much more credibility through the questions that you ask than the stories you tell. Let me say that one more time. You gain far more credibility through the questions you ask than the stories you tell. And salespeople can tell stories all day long, and there's certainly a time and a place for that. But that first call, if you spend 70% of that call seeking to understand your candidate, because that's human nature at the end of the day, that's most people's deepest desire, is to be understood and be known, right? And when you do that, I've literally had candidates tell me, hey, your developer, Deborah, your developer, Darren, your developer, Mark, they took the time to get to know me and not just sell me on the brand and features and benefits. Like they truly took time to understand me, and that immediately differentiated you from the 2 or 3 other franchise brands that I was talking with. And when I hear that, I've got a huge smile on the other end of the phone because I know my team's doing it the right way. And I'm telling you, if you want to differentiate yourself from the vast majority of franchisees out there, take the time up front to get to know who you're talking to. And that will separate you from 90% of other franchisees that are out there. And then from then, it's a very standardized process, right? You do a brand review that's typically done through a visual PowerPoint online, through a screen share. You FDD, your economics review, franchisee validation, executive approval call, meet the team day. Another key part of a process that I think more and more franchises have started to adopt is we always call it a contingent franchise agreement. You want to get that franchise agreement in the candidate's hand before meet the team day, not after. And we always call it a contingent franchise agreement because it's contingent upon final approval by the executive team. So the conversation goes something like, hey, Scott, and me and Susie are coming down to meet the team day in a couple of weeks. Hey, wouldn't it be helpful, Scott, if I had my team send you a contingent franchise agreement to review over the next 2 to 3 weeks prior to coming to meet the team day? Again, it's completely contingent upon attending meet the team day and final approval by the executive team. But I want to make sure you have a chance to review that we don't have any questions on the actual agreement before coming down. I've never had anyone say, no, I don't think so. I mean, every single person goes, yes, absolutely. That would be extremely helpful and beneficial. And that's like after meet the team days when people are on an emotional high, they've come down, they've started to emotionally buy into the brand and the leadership team. We always say in sales and in development, time kills deals. I believe time kills deals only after the team day, not before. I would rather add a few more steps. I would rather, if they're not quite ready to come to this meet the team day, push them to the next one a couple of weeks later if they haven't got their validation fully done or they haven't had a chance to review the agreement, whatever the case may be, because that clock, when you start to lose people, that clock literally starts the day they walk out your door after meet the team day, not before. So that's a different mentality shift that I teach my team is time kills deals, but not before meet the team day. That clock, when you start to lose people, literally starts as soon as meet the team day is done. So that's why I say slow down up front, get all your ducks in a row, make sure they're fully bought in and ready to come to meet the team day, and then you're ready to close them immediately after they buy in.
Awesome. I want to restate a few things you said there, Dan, because I think there's some really important tips for franchisors. Okay, one is the first call, talk less. Stop selling, right? Ask questions. People love to talk about themselves. Let them talk about themselves. They're giving you, you're making that emotional connection. The more they talk about themselves, the more comfortable they're actually going to be with you. And so that is super important, that first call. Second, you mentioned brand review. It's a formal call. It's a secondary call, it sounds like. And in that brand review, it's a PowerPoint. It's, let me talk to you about the brand now. All the numbers, the figures, the start costs, the people, what makes our brand unique, right? Then third is an FDD call, which is a review to go through the FDD, all the items and what's involved in there. Fourth is setting up a validation. That's not a validation call. That sounds like we're setting you up to validate with other franchisees or maybe attend a validation call with a franchisee, right? The salesperson isn't necessarily attending those calls, although they may be present on the validation call. But we're now 4 steps in, and we haven't met the team yet. Then we've got an executive approval. This is where I'm assuming the brand president or the VP of Ops is saying, okay, I like this candidate. They can fit in our system. They fit a profile we have for them. And if they've got the funds and if they have the territory available, we would take them, right? So we're now at 5 steps, and then we're at meet the team. So those 5 boxes have to be checked before you even introduce them to the entire team at a neighborly, you can call it meet the team discovery day or whatever. It's that in-person event. The spouse is invited in many cases, if not every time, if there's a spouse.
Right.
And it's making sure that the person is now at a point of decision. And this is what you said earlier, getting them a contingent agreement that says, hey, as long as we approve you after meet the team day, you're set to sign. Now, what I like about that is we all know time does kill deals. After meet the team day, they have to get that agreement reviewed by legal almost every time. Maybe, and I don't know, I used to do franchise sales for my own brands very early days, right? And I'd say half the time they didn't have a lawyer involved, right? They pretend they had a lawyer. They get their brother, and their brother would do the review. The other half of the time, they actually had an attorney involved. But regardless, that attorney takes time. And it'd be good to have that person having that in legal and review while you're there planning to meet the team day. So that can be ready to go, and you can almost close right after that. I think that you've done a great job of describing that sales process for us. After meet the team day, right, you've taken them through all of that. They have the agreement. It's decision time. I'm assuming at this point it's like, when are we closing and funding? They go dark. What do you do, Dan? What CPR are you putting on your candidates to bring them back to life?
Yeah. Let me give you a huge shift mentally, Scott, that when I implemented this years ago, it had a dramatic increase in my meet the team day to close ratio. Because as franchisors and as salespeople, we are so eager after meet the team day to get our candidate to say, to give them the approval. Hey, the team met you. We love you. We met Susie. Your wife's amazing. Hey, you guys are a perfect fit for us culturally. Welcome aboard. If you'll have us, we're ready to go for it. I mean, I literally had developers on my team who I almost had to rein them in from doing that because they were so excited to give the approval to the candidate. But what you do is we've built this reverse psychology throughout the entire process. And the minute you do that after meet the team day, you lose all authority and you lose all control of the entire process. So a big shift for me that I implemented years and years ago was after meet the team day, and I built this into the timeline so candidates knew this was coming prior to coming down. It wasn't a surprise and didn't spring it on them. But once they got home, we would talk about, hey, how was the day? What you learned? What stood out to you? How did Susie feel about it? What were questions answered? Yes, great. Well, hey, listen, Scott, where we go from here, I don't present anyone to the rest of the executive team for final approval until you've 100% committed that you're ready to move forward with the brand, you're ready to join the team. I want to make sure all of your questions are answered and you and Susie are 100% committed to moving forward. Then and only then will I present you to the rest of the executive team for final approval. And what that does is it psychologically gets them to buy in and say yes. They haven't signed anything, haven't written a check, but you do that one simple step, you will dramatically increase your closing percentage after the team day. And I've had people where they go, yeah, I think we're there. Do you mind, we're going to dinner tonight. Do you mind if Susie and I just sit down one more time, look each other in the eye, call you back first thing tomorrow at 8 a.m., let you know our decision? Absolutely. 100%. I've had people who they take a week to review the agreement again before, and they still haven't been approved, right? So withholding that approval, it's kind of like dating, and you're trying to figure out, do you go to another day? Do I ask this girl to prom? Right? There's a lot of dating analogies that go into franchise development, but getting them to where because when they can look themselves in the mirror or they can look their spouse in the eye and say, yes, we're 110% committed to moving forward. We're ready to join the brand. Yep. Please present us for approval. Then it's, hey, we met with the team. We think you guys are perfect for the brand. You fit us culturally. I mean, you can church that up and get them excited that you are as excited about them as they are about you. But they've already emotionally and mentally bought in and committed, and then so have you. And then what it does is signing the agreement and paying the franchise fee, it's just academic at that point. It's not a big deal. It's just mechanical just to go to the next step, which is onboarding. It takes a lot of the scariness and the big deal away from the agreement and the money. So I would say if you're struggling with chasing people after meeting,
Jerry Jones and good to see Jerry made the comment, very key step to ensure they are 100% committed to move forward. Thanks for making that point. I've got a few questions here I want to get to. If anyone else has questions, feel free to load those in, and I will make sure I ask them of Dan. Matt Kelton, good to see you, Matt. Thanks for joining us again. Has a question. What is the average lead generation budget for the brands you support? How much money do you expect a brand to be spending on a month to get the lead flow happening?
Yeah, obviously it depends on what your sales budget is. That's going to highly drive what your lead gen budget is, depending on how many units you're looking to sell and what your cost per lead is. I've got brands that are spending as little as $3,000 to $4,000 a month. I've got brands that are spending up to $10,000 to $12,000 a month on organic lead generation. So it really depends on the capacity of your development team and how many developers you have selling, what's your mix of broker versus organic, and how many units are you looking to sell. But I would say, like anything, I mean, you should have a healthy. Same thing we teach our franchisees, right? Most healthy franchise owners should be spending roughly 10% of your top line revenue in marketing, right? You talk about a local franchising community of our brands. If you're $1 million operator, you should be spending around 90 to 100 grand a year in in lead gen and marketing, right? It's no different if you're looking to have $1 million in franchise fee revenue. You should be having roughly 10% of
and that's
your
excluding the broker fees, right? So if you want to collect $1 million in franchise fees, you should be spending about $100,000 a year on just lead gen, organic, correct, portal leads. And I think maybe just put this in ask this question again for correct, Matt. Let's say that your goal was to move 20 units a
that's
year.
Right.
Right? If you're moving 20 units a year and you had a full strategy, so you have brokers, you've got portals, you've got organic, you've got LinkedIn, you've got referral programs, you got a full mix. You're hitting all the different areas that you can think of. Trade shows, maybe it's coming there and here and there. But let's say you wanted to move 20 units. What would you expect? What would you tell someone they need to be spending to get to 20 units sales a year in terms of marketing spend?
Yeah, and I hate to give it depends answer, but it really does depend on what your franchise fee is and what that equates to in revenue. Because I think so if you're, do quick math, whatever your top line revenue is, yep, you should be allocating 10% of that in lead generation. Because broker leads are free, right? I mean, they're free to work. You pay on the back end, so there's no cost for those at all. But if you're truly going to drive, I think that's two big issues I see with most franchisors is their initial franchise fees too low. They're undervaluing what they're worth. And so when you don't want to price yourself out of the market or highway robbery or without looking to gouge people. But I think most franchisors are afraid of setting their franchise fee where it really should be based on the value that they're bringing to their franchisees. And when you do that one simple thing, it frees you up to have a very healthy lead budget. You can increase your commissions to brokers, which incentivizes them to bring you someone who may buy only 1 or 2 territories versus 5. So that's where it's the same thing we teach our franchisees, right? Price your services correctly, and everything else will not take care of itself.
So this might be helpful then as we're thinking about budgeting. So it sounds like at 20 units at $50,000 of franchise fee, it's $1 million budget. That means you should be spending around $100,000 in marketing to kind of get to the specifics for you, Matt. But let's just maybe talk a little bit about some benchmarks that we should be thinking about. If you get 10 leads from a broker, how many of those are you closing, Dan? If you're getting 100 leads from a portal, how many of those are you closing? If you're getting 100 leads from LinkedIn and Google, how many of those are you closing? Give us some benchmarks so we can know if we're spending $10,000, how many leads we got to be pulling in to make those sales happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would recommend everyone go look at the data that Frank Connect publishes annually. They track really good stats on franchise development. Some stats from their 2020 report is
that's the
0.05% of franchise leads end up actually buying a franchise. That's all leads. So not even a full percent. That's the average. 0.5% of leads end up buying a franchise. And 80% of franchise inquiries go unanswered. Again, this is the 2020 Frank Connect data report that they put out there. So it's right. Everyone wants more leads, and as a franchise development person, you're never going to hear me say, "Let's go get less leads." More leads are always correct, but your speed to lead. Again, another Frank Connect data point shows that if you can connect with a lead within 4 hours of inquiry, your chances of selling that person go up astronomically if you can connect with them as quickly as humanly possible. And you've got a lot of brands out there that are emerging or they're kind of mid-market where, just like you're talking about, Scott, maybe the founders doing a lot of development themselves. So they're busy, right? They have franchisees that they're supporting and trying to do development themselves. And you've got to build a system or hire a professional development company to make sure that those leads are getting contacted quickly, because that speed to lead is huge in this business. And it's not just about the number of leads, it's how you're contacting them, how you're working them. Are you setting your leads up on drip campaigns? I mean, we're working people, my team's working people right now in our pipeline that we have several candidates going through the process right now that requested information on franchises back in 2019, 2020 that we still have continual drip campaigns, and you hit them with the right message or the right brand, and they go, yeah, that's something I'm interested in. It wasn't the right time 3 years ago because of XYZ, but it is the right time for us now for whatever reason that is. So if you're not nurturing your leads, you're missing the boat in a big way. And so I've found having the development person, I talked about, pulling those Better Business Bureau listings,
sure,
calling leads. I couldn't even imagine doing that today. It's kind of an antiquated process, but you truly need to have someone in your development department who is your first point of contact, and that's all they do. And having that person be the funnel for broker leads, for portal leads, for internet leads, so it frees your development team up to where they can spend their time on the phone walking candidates through that process and not being a person chasing those leads down. You need to have a dedicated lead qualifier that all they do.
Great tip. I think I couldn't agree more. It's actually the premise of ProNexus. Our whole business at ProNexus is about speed to lead. We've seen stats, endless stats on this. Introducing texting into your response mechanism. It's the response rates on texting is way higher than email. And you have to have a candidate or a person who is qualifying people that uses everything: text, chat, email, any way possible to get people engaged. On that, let's switch channels here for a second. Angela Pauls had a question for us on what are the typical sales goals you set for your team. So number of Z's per year.
So it depends on the developer. So and this is just my personal opinion, I think a mature franchise developer should be capable of closing 15 to 20, not units, but actual individual new franchisees in a year. So if some of those are 2 packs or 3 packs, now maybe you're talking about 30 to 40 actual units, but I'm talking about individual transactions. You should be able to average 1.5 to getting close to 2 of those a month for a mature developer. And again, if they're buying multiple territories, you can map that out to understand what that is. So again, it depends on what your budget is for the brand. Is that a brand that needs 1 developer? We had brands at Neighborly where we had upwards to 2 or 3 developers based on what the unit goal was. But if you couldn't close at least 15 to 20 individual, bring on new owners in a year, you probably want to go somewhere else, because that's not an unrealistic number at all. We had developers closing north of 30.
That's a good tip. I think for 5-star, our expectation is between 15 and 20 individual deals, and that might result in 25, in some cases 27 territories sold from one franchise professional. So I think that's good. It's a good tip. I think this has been fantastic. Dan, you've got tons of words of wisdom here. I love how you hit on some really important points around the sales process. And I think one of my big takeaways is a reminder that, do less talking, let the candidate talk more, spend more time finding out what's driving their decisions, what's their why, involving their spouse very early in the process, making sure you have a very step-driven process where you know what you're going to do at each point, and make sure your sales executives are following that, are all great tips, I think, for all of us to remind us about how to approach franchise development. And this has been fantastic. Thank you all for all you who have attended and listened in or asked questions. Thank you for your support and involvement. And thank you, Dan, for being here today. We really appreciate your time.